going to say a couple of things about our organization and what it is that we do. The Climate Center has a mission. Our mission is speed and scale greenhouse gas reductions here in California as an example for the world. We've been around for about 15 years and we've accomplished a lot in our time together. We had a key role in growing community choice energy here in California to the point where there are now 21 CCAs serving 11 million Californians, which is 1/4 of the Golden State, with 88% clean energy today. We're very happy about that success that we accomplished in collaboration with a broad coalition of partners in the private sector, in the nonprofit sector, and in government, but there is so much more work to do. The climate crisis is the crisis of our times, and we are really happy that you are here with us today to learn the baseline. What does the science require so that we can move together to craft the right kinds of policies to get us into a better place? We dub those policies Climate Safe California. That is the suite of policies that we are working on, and we've got a series of webinars coming up on these topics. So before we move on to today's webinar, I just want to remind everybody that we've got a series of webinars coming up. The next one in February on phasing out fossil fuels. We've got another one on powering local community energy systems. The fourth webinar on clean mobility, natural sequestration, something I'm particularly interested in, funding climate action, how we're going to pay for all of this. And we're going to conclude all of this in June with a policy summit on Climate Safe California. We invite you all to join all of them. You can sign up for the second webinar right now. I'm going to ask my colleague Nina to drop the registration link in the chat, February 23rd from 10 to 11:30. We've got this fantastic webinar on phasing out fossil fuels, a just transition in the oil and gas drilling and refining sectors. What's it going to mean for the people working in the oil and gas sector and for the communities that have become dependent on these polluting industries as we transition away from fossil fuels? We hope you'll join that webinar and learn more about that. Of course, none of this would be possible without a broad coalition of partners, including our sponsors. So I just want to take a moment to thank them: Renewable America, Enphase. Thank you both for being high-level sponsors, and all of our sponsors: Terra Verde Energy, the Bay Area Air Quality Management District, Willow Creek Wealth Management, Sunrun, and others still coming on. So we want to thank all of you. If any of you work for businesses and would like to find out more about sponsorship, please feel free to contact us directly at the Climate Center. And of course, our promotional partners, the fabulous array of nonprofits and community groups that we are working with on a daily basis to advance Climate Safe California and all of the various policies that are entailed. Joint Venture Silicon Valley, Climate Resolve, Actera, Clean Coalition, the Local Government Commission, the Better World Group, California League of Conservation Voters, and Drawdown Bay Area. So I do want to just go through a couple of housekeeping items. We're going to hear from Dr. Ben Santer today, and also from our CEO at the Climate Center, Ellie Cohen. And after they've completed their presentations, we will have time for Q&A with the whole panel. So please drop your questions in the Q&A tab at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Our team will be sorting and prioritizing those questions as we go. So fire away, and we'll do our best to answer as many of those questions as possible when we reach the end of our presentations. You can use the chat to communicate with each other or let us know if you're experiencing technical difficulties. But for questions, we ask that you please do use the Q&A. I should note, we will do our best to answer all your questions, but given the time restrictions and the immensity of this topic, we probably won't be able to answer them all. So thank you all for understanding. I do want to mention that Climate Safe California is a campaign, and we invite you all to join that campaign. Over 800 people just like you have already endorsed this platform, and you can endorse the platform too. It's a very simple thing to do. My colleague Nina is going to drop a link in the chat. Those 800 people include business leaders. They include elected officials, including congressmen and senators and state senators and others. We ask that you consider endorsing Climate Safe California either now or after you hear Ellie's presentation, at which point you will be compelled to endorse this policy platform. We are challenging this group to give us 30 new endorsements today. If you can do that, that would be great. I will report at the end of this meeting how many of those endorsements we have received. So I see questions are already coming in. I'm going to stop my share screen now because I would like to introduce our first speaker from the Union of Concerned Scientists to give a update and to introduce our main speaker, Ben Santer. I would like to introduce Jason Barbose. Now, Jason is a Western State Senior Policy Manager at the Union of Concerned Scientists. You've been advocating for science-based climate solutions for over 15 years in a variety of organizations. We appreciate all the work you do. I should mention that Ben made the very wise choice to follow up his undergraduate degree at UC Santa Cruz with a graduate degree at UC Berkeley. I mean, it worked for me. I'm glad it's working for you too. So welcome, Jason. The floor is yours.
Great, thank you. Give a thumbs up if you can hear me okay. Perfect, okay. Well, thank you, Daron and the Climate Center for inviting me to kick off this webinar. What a moment to talk about the role of science in policy. To be alive in America today, I think, is to really witness that disinformation is persistent and pervasive in our society, that it's harmful to public health and safety, and that it's corrosive to our democracy. I mean, we all on this webinar here have just survived 4 years with a president who manipulated and suppressed and pushed to the sidelines the work of scientists within the federal government to really an unprecedented level, while of course, personally peddling lies and disinformation daily. I read in the Washington Post that they estimated that he personally made 30,000 false or misleading claims during his time in office. And while Donald Trump may be the most egregious assailer of science in recent history, he's not the first, and he won't be the last. Attacks on science and the scientific process have occurred by many elected officials, and respect for science in government really cannot be taken for granted. And in addition, I should note that there's a long history of corporate actors who manipulate science and spin facts that are a threat to their bottom line. Powerful industries have a long history of publishing bogus research, of manufacturing uncertainty on issues in which there is actually none, of harassing scientists who do work related to their industry. And then there's the lobbying, the campaign contributions, the revolving door relationships with government agencies, all of which can derail science-based policy by allowing corporate actors disproportionate influence over the process of policymaking. And the fossil fuel industry, as I suspect many of you know, is really a prime example of this. Fossil fuel companies and their trade associations have peddled climate disinformation for decades, since the late 1980s, in fact, when the scientific community overwhelmingly recognized the risks and reality of global warming. These companies and groups have been on the offensive. They've manufactured uncertainty and rejected science-based policy. But if attacks on science and evidence-based decision-making in government are longstanding, as they are, so too are the benefits of using science to guide policymaking. Throughout our history, the safety and health of the public have benefited hugely when the government has committed to and used science, and it's been transformative. In just the last few decades alone, government scientists and government support of science have contributed to mapping the human genome, to spurring the creation of the internet, saving imperiled species from extinction, mitigating dangerous risks to human health with revolutionary vaccine campaigns, with life-saving medical procedures, and all kinds of other basic and applied science research. So the scientific process remains humanity's best tool for understanding the natural world. It is our best method for assessing threats to human health and safety and developing solutions to our most pressing problems. And of course, there is no problem more pressing or threat to our health and safety greater than the monumental threat of climate change. And so I'm really grateful that the Climate Center is kicking off this webinar series with a focus on the science of climate change and its implications for public policy. We all have the distinct honor today of hearing from a highly respected climate scientist in Dr. Ben Santer. Dr. Santer is an atmospheric scientist at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. He studies what are called fingerprints in observed climate records. And his early research contributed to the historic 1995 United Nations report that concluded that, quote, the balance of evidence suggests a human influence on global climate. And that report was 26 years ago. It was historic for its time. And since 1995, Ben has identified human fingerprints in atmospheric temperature and water vapor, ocean heat content, sea surface temperature and hurricane regions, and many other climate variables. Ben holds a doctorate in climatology from the University of East Anglia in England. And he's received a number of awards for his research, including a MacArthur Fellowship and membership in the National Academy of Sciences. In my humble opinion, not the least among his credentials is his service on the board of directors of my organization, the Union of Concerned Scientists. So thank you, Ben, for being with us, and I'll turn it over to you.
Can everyone see my screen? Thank you very much for that kind introduction, Jason. This isn't just a pretty picture. This shows the amount of water vapor in the atmosphere as measured from space. And those filaments are atmospheric rivers that you see hitting the west coast of the United States. And you're about to experience another one of those in the next couple of days. Please stay safe and well, everyone. And we'll get back to water vapor a little bit later. It's one of the fingerprints of human effects on climate that Jason mentioned. I'd like to preface my brief remarks here by saying that climate change is now in our backyards. It's not just something in the far-flung Arctic or Pacific Islands. This summer in the Bay Area was extraordinary. This is a picture of the Golden Gate Bridge on the left in September 2020. The orange sky was otherworldly, as it's been described, apocalyptic, arising from the filtering out of blue wavelengths of light by smoke particles in the atmosphere. I moved from the Bay Area to Fort Collins in Colorado in October 2020, and the picture on the right is from my new home in Fort Collins. I thought I would escape the Bay Area fires for clean air of the Front Range in the Rockies, but as soon as I got here, I experienced the Cameron Peak fire, the largest fire in Colorado's history. We are changing the fire season in the Western US. Again, that's one of the things I'll talk about a little bit later. And the consequences are going to be severe for economy, for human health. Again, the message is climate change is in our backyards now. My job here was to provide you with a little bit of an update of key developments in climate science. And I thought I'd give you a summary of what those key developments might be, first in Scientific American and then in the Atlantic. So from Scientific American's perspective, the top stories were indeed record-breaking wildfires in Australia and the US. The Australian wildfires even got smoke up into the stratosphere, 20 miles above the surface through these pyrocumulus events. Another top story was 30 named storms in the 2020 Atlantic hurricane season. The season started earlier, it ended later, really in uncharted territory in terms of the number and often the severity of Atlantic hurricanes. Another key development was that 2020 is judged to be either the second warmest year globally or tied warmest with 2016. A COVID-driven decrease in fossil fuel emissions. So with COVID and with the slowdown and in some cases shutdown of the global economy, There was a decrease in fossil fuel emissions. I'll show you that in a few slides. That was a big story too. And arguably one of the biggest stories was the decision of the incoming Biden-Harris administration to reverse President Trump's decision to remove the United States from the Paris Climate Agreement. In the Atlantic, it was a different set of top stories. So they concluded that President Xi's announcement that China intends to start reducing its carbon footprint by 2020 and achieve net zero by 2060 was the top story. And the second story was that European Union leaders pledged a new target of 50% greenhouse gas reduction by 2030, a more ambitious target than 40% reduction they had originally proposed. Like Scientific American, The Atlantic concluded that the COVID-driven decrease in fossil fuel emissions was big news in 2020. And another development was that the markets really began to consider the cost of climate change and the benefits of transition to clean energy. In the words of Robinson Meyer at The Atlantic, 2020 was the year that the climate became the economy. The Atlantic also judged that a bipartisan bill to phase out hydrofluorocarbons, very potent greenhouse gases, was big news in 2020. So let's drill down into some of these stories. First, I mentioned this COVID-related decrease in fossil fuel emissions. It's judged that that decrease was about 7%. And of course, that decrease happened for a catastrophic reason, not because of any human intent to reduce emissions of greenhouse gases. And whether this decrease of roughly 7% will have a discernible signal in the concentrations of atmospheric CO2 in the atmosphere, we will see in the next few months or so, whether that decrease in emissions is detectable. Again, another big story was the unusual global warmth of 2020. 2020 is estimated to have been nearly 1.25 degrees Celsius, over 2.25 degrees Fahrenheit, above the average temperature of the second half of the 19th century. And one of the remarkable things about 2020 was that this record-tying warmth occurred even though there was a La Nina at the end of 2020. La Ninas are natural events that cause global scale cooling, and you can see some of this in the Eastern Equatorial Pacific. But despite this natural La Nina event, which tended to depress temperatures, 2020 was unusually warm. I like this graphic. This is from the folks at Berkeley Earth. They have terrific and very compelling graphical analyses of complex climate data. And what you see here is their estimate of the implications for continued warming at the rate we've experienced since 1980 for our passing of these two thresholds. So the first threshold is the 2 degrees Celsius dangerous anthropogenic interference threshold that we would like to avoid. And the 1.5 degrees Celsius threshold is this aspirational goal. We'd really like to limit warming relative to pre-industrial to less than 1.5 degrees Celsius. So if we continued warming at the rate that we have done since 1980, we would pass this aspirational goal about 15 years from now and pass the dangerous anthropogenic interference target by early 2060s or so. So this illustrates the magnitude of the problem. We really need to urgently reduce emissions of greenhouse gases to avoid passing these thresholds and causing very, very serious damage to the climate system. Another brief update on the seasonal granularity of the changes in temperature. The past few figures just showed you global mean temperature, annual mean. And what you see here is the temperature changes relative to the second half of the 20th century in every month of the year. And perhaps the kicker here is this thick red line, which is 2020. So every month of the year was at least 1 degree Celsius warmer than the second half of the 19th century. So we've seen warming throughout the seasons, and this has had a catastrophic impact on our fire season in the Western US. Another thing that I focused on together with my colleague Carl Mears and others is the so-called vertical fingerprint of human effects on climate. And that's what you see here. You see a slice through the Earth's atmosphere from the South Pole to the North Pole, and from the surface right up to about 20 kilometers. These are these beautiful satellite measurements that Carl Mears and other scientists look at that provide information since 1979 about the change in the vertical structure of atmospheric temperature. And you see this warming of the lower atmosphere, the troposphere, and cooling of the upper atmosphere. The largest warming low down is over the Arctic, where we've seen about a 40% decrease in the extent of Arctic sea ice. The key point to note here, perhaps, is that this vertical fingerprint, warming low down, cooling up high, is fundamentally inconsistent with the hypothesis that the sun and an increase in the sun's energy output explains all recent observed climate change. If that were the case, if the sun indeed were the primary driver of all warming of the surface over the last 40 plus years, you would expect to see heating throughout the full vertical extent of the atmosphere. We don't see that. That's why these measurements are so critically important here. Another measurement that's critically important is atmospheric moisture. So here from our friends at Remote Sensing Systems in Santa Rosa, what you see is the temperature of the lower atmosphere, the troposphere, and you nicely see this warming of roughly 0.2 degrees C per decade in the tropics. And in the tropics, that warming drives an increase in atmospheric moisture. Again, getting back to the first slide I showed you, these satellite-based measurements of atmospheric moisture changes, you can see that as temperatures in the tropics have warmed, the atmosphere has moistened in the tropics. And you can nicely see too this beautiful consistency between the variability in temperature in red and water vapor in blue. This is the big El Nino event in 1997-98. El Ninos on average warm the planet, purely natural event, and that moistens the atmosphere. This, for example, is the big El Nino in 2015-2016, which again warmed the planet and moistened the atmosphere. So these two things are pretty much in lockstep in the tropics. You increase temperature and you increase moisture. And what we see in climate model simulations, which is what you're looking at here, is the ratio between these two trends, the trend in moisture and the trend in temperature. And the blue is from older climate models. The brown distribution here is from newer climate models. These are simulations from literally hundreds of different computer models of the climate system by dozens of scientific institutions around the world. And what this tells you is that for roughly a 1 degree Celsius increase in tropical temperature, you get about a 5% increase in atmospheric moisture. So this ratio is very, very tightly constrained, both in computer models and in theory. So the two move in lockstep. Now, if you look at satellite observations, you can see that there's about a factor of 2 difference in this very basic and very well understood physical quantity, the relationship between tropical temperature changes and tropical moisture changes. And all these vertical lines, there's 6 of them, are from different satellite estimates of tropospheric temperature change. They can't all be right, and all of them are much larger than the model expectations. So the message from this is that the degree of moistening that we've seen in the real world atmosphere is inconsistent with the degree of warming in the real world atmosphere. And that indicates that we have likely still, in these satellite-based estimates of troposphere temperature change, underestimated the true warming of the Earth's atmosphere. Now, why might that be important? Well, it's important for this reason. Here you see these troposphere temperature changes, again in blue in older climate models, in brown in newer climate models. And you can see that the warming in these model simulations is larger than in the satellite data, particularly since about 2000 or so. And that points towards at least one explanation, the explanation that there may be indeed some systematic underestimate of the true warming of Earth's atmosphere in these satellite data sets. An inference that is confirmed by the satellite water vapor data that I showed you just a little earlier. Now, why do we care about this stuff at all? One of the reasons is that these troposphere temperatures, these satellite temperatures, have been of great concern to Congress. So this is now not looking at the tropics, but looking globally at the temperature of the lower atmosphere. You see this overall warming trend. And in December 2015, Senator Ted Cruz looked at this data. He held a hearing called the Data or Dogma hearing in the US Senate, December 2015. And he stated that this record showed no significant warming for the past 18 years. So here was the time of the hearing, and Senator Cruz was cherry picking. He went back 18 years to this natural warm event, this big 97, 98 El Nino, and said that when he ignored the previous record and focused only on this window of time, there was little or no warming. And he made this claim not only in Senate testimony, but also on Late Night with Seth Meyers. My colleagues and I looked at Senator Cruz's claim since it was part of the official congressional record, and we tested his claim, and we showed that he was wrong, that in 5 of 6 satellite data sets we looked at, even if one cherry picked, it didn't work because of the background global scale warming trend. So this speaking science to power led to this extraordinary opportunity.
And I'm happy to hear that, but where are you finding optimism right now, considering the sort of deck that's stacked against you?
Well, it seems like a real teachable moment. Climate science has been elevated in public discourse. Look at that. Look at Senator Cruz appearing on your program, making testable claims. The President of the United States saying nobody really knows the causes of climate change, and we do. So this is a moment when people are willing to listen, when I can come on your show and say, nobody really knows is wrong. It's fake news.
Yeah. I'm really,
So what I want those teachable moments. I want to tell people, this is our understanding. These are the likely outcomes if we do nothing about the problem of human-caused climate change. And let's have a respectful, honest debate on what to do about it. But let's not dismiss this incorrectly as a hoax or a conspiracy. We all lose if we embrace ignorance with open arms.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more. And thank you so much for making the time. It's fantastic to have you here. Dr. Ben Santer.
So doing science led to this extraordinary opportunity to restore balance in the force, as it were, and to rebut Senator Cruz on the very program where he had made these incorrect claims. Just finally, I think that it's also important to declare one's values, not to just talk about science and evidence. So at the end of my few minutes here, let me just declare my values. In addition to being a climate scientist, I'm also a climber and a mountaineer. These are pictures that I've taken over my 50-year lifetime as a climber in the Alps, in the Himalayas, in the Rockies, in beautiful, fragile alpine environments around the world. These places have value for me. If we lose them, and they are changing before our eyes in a very, very short period of time, what do we lose? How are we diminished if we lose these places, if we lose coral reefs, if we lose tropical rainforests? And we are. So let's have a discussion in addition to the scientific evidence about the values that we place on these things. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity, and I'm hoping that all of you remain safe and well.
Thank you so much, Dr. Santer. So much great information there. We really appreciate you condensing a lifetime of work into 10 minutes. That's a very impressive job there. And thank you all for being here. We're going to move right on to the next question, because if the situation is indeed so dire, the question becomes, so what can we do about it? And what we can do about it is advocate for the policies that respond directly to the science that Dr. Santer just presented. So I'm happy to turn it over to our CEO here at the Climate Center, Ellie Cohen. Without any further ado, Ellie, what are we going to do about it?
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Santer. That was really fantastic. Thank you for your incredible leadership over the years and standing up with truth and science to power. We are truly grateful to you. I want to just start off to bring us to California a little bit. And here's the headlines after that orange sky day of the photo that Ben showed earlier. That is amazing. A front page headline from the LA Times: California's climate apocalypse. The calamity is no longer in the future, it's here now. We know, in addition to all that science, that we're having increased health impacts, especially to our most vulnerable communities, primarily communities of color, extreme heat being the most deadly. Those smoke storms that cause the orange skies, it's been estimated by some Stanford scientists that in addition to the 32 people that died directly from the fires in 2020, that another 1,200 to 3,000 people died from particulate matter from the smoke in the air. We know that climate inaction or inadequate action is bankrupting our economy. And by investing sooner, we will save lives and we will save money. Just a few weeks ago, the Federal Reserve announced that banks have to consider climate risks. And we know that, that not investing threatens markets and pension funds and all aspects of our economy. But maybe the biggest study that came out in the past few weeks regarding us in California is that the 2018 fires that destroyed the city of Paradise and had huge impacts beyond the actual footprint cost $150 billion in damages. Our annual budget in California is around $220 billion, so 2/3 in 1 year. $80 billion cost in 2019. We can't go on like this. We need to invest early, and we know that $80 billion invested in California can generate 750,000 jobs, and that investments in clean energy generate more than twice the jobs as in fossil fuels. We also know that we're having incredibly devastating impacts on the environment. This study or analysis just came out last week. Humanity is causing a rapid loss of biodiversity, and with it, Earth's ability to support complex life. But the mainstream is having difficulty grasping the magnitude of this loss, despite the steady erosion of the fabric of human civilization. The deterioration of our climate system and environment is outpacing outdated policy. Leaders are now stepping up, thankfully. Governor Newsom on September 11th announced that we're in a climate dam emergency. Our goals are inadequate. We have to fast track our goals. He issued 2 new executive orders during the weeks after for 100% zero emission vehicle new car sales by 2035 and to protect 30% of our land and waters by 2030. But even with that and everything we just heard from Dr. Santer, it's not enough, and California is behind. We have new international and proposed national climate targets. The European Union recently committed to at least 55% below 1990 greenhouse gas levels by 2030. California's current goal by 2030 is 40%. We're behind. The United Kingdom, under conservative leader Boris Johnson, recently committed to a cut of 68% below 1990 levels by 2030 and 100% ZEV car sales by 2030, not 2035. California needs to lead, and it can, but we need to do more. The Biden administration is committed to greenhouse gas-free electricity by 2035. We don't have that on our books until 2045, and net zero buildings by 2030. We need to move forward. The Senate Select Committee came out with a report last August recommending, and I believe that the Biden administration is adopting a version of this, that the country invest 2% annually of the gross domestic product in climate solutions, with 40% dedicated to lower income communities. If we did that in California based on our 2019 numbers, we'd be investing $64 billion a year from the total economy. We need to do more. California has been a leader in the past. We need to retake that leadership mantle, and we can set an example as the demonstration project, the pilot project for the country and the world. We need more aggressive policies and accelerated timelines in California now. And so we have developed, with many partners, Climate Safe California, a campaign for rapid decarbonization. Our vision is that by 2025, California will have enacted the bold policies required by the science and climate reality to dramatically reduce emissions, start drawdown, and secure resilient communities by 2030, inspiring global action. Our guiding principles for all of these policies under Climate Safe California are, they must be based on the latest science. They have to ensure a just transition for fossil fuel workers and those in related industries. We don't want anyone left behind. And third, we need to prioritize climate justice, which we believe is racial justice, and ensure that lower income communities and communities of color are no longer disproportionately harmed by fossil fuels and by climate impacts, and that they have equitable access to climate-friendly solutions. So here's another way of looking at it. California's measured emissions, here's where we've been. This red bar is 1990 levels. It's 431 million metric tons. Here's zero down here of emissions per year. Here's what we've been celebrating recently, that we are below, before 2020, these 1990 levels of 425 million metric tons a year. Well, we can celebrate, but you can see we have a long way to go. We're still putting out a lot of emissions annually. Here is our current 2030 goal, to get to 40% below 1990 levels by 2030, or 259 million metric tons. Not enough based on how quickly things are changing, as Ben outlined. What we want to get to is some version of this. We can double our current goal to get to 80% below 1990 levels, which would leave us at 86 million metric tons, and match that with a massive investment in nature-based solutions, in sequestration on natural and working lands through changes in habitat management and restoration of habitat. And we know this is possible. It just requires the political will to put the amount of money in that's really needed. And if you do these, you get to the beginning of drawdown, negative 14 million metric tons. What we want to see on this chart are these going down and this increasing and increasing over the years ahead. This means that 2030 is just the start of securing a climate safe future. So what does that mean in policy terms? We need to accelerate existing state goals. Right now, we have on the books to get to carbon neutrality and then net negative emissions immediately thereafter. By 2045, we want to move that up to 2030. Get to 80% below 1990 levels, which is currently slated for 2050. We want to move that up to 2030 and add to that nature-based annual sequestration to be greater than emissions by 2030. What are the kinds of policies needed? We need to accelerate the phase out of fossil fuel development, production, and use with the just transition, scale up nature-based sequestration, invest in community resilience, and fund climate action to the tune of 12 to 20 billion a year is our estimate. So a little more detail on the policy possibilities. Again, this is a range of the suite of policies that are needed, and many different partners across the state of California are working on various aspects of this. The goal of Climate Safe California is to bring it together, to bring all of our voices together, to bring that kind of truth to power in our own state, the 5th largest economy in the world. So accelerating the phase out of fossil fuels, we need to immediately halt new oil and gas drilling and infrastructure. Why would we invest in that now when it's going to last for 30 years? We need to invest in this transition for fossil fuel workers to good quality jobs or early retirement. Establish health and safety buffer zones around wells. Secure 100% greenhouse gas free electricity with storage by 2030. No new gas powered or diesel powered vehicle registrations by 2030, and electrify everything, getting to 100% of new buildings being electrified by 2022, for example, in our building code update. And that includes getting to a ban on methane gas and quickly cutting the short-lived climate pollutants like methane. Second, getting to the 100 million metric tons sequestered annually per year by 2030. We are seeing demonstrations of this across California with carbon farming, climate smart habitat restoration, enhancing protected habitats, and clearly engaging indigenous communities and applying that traditional ecological knowledge will be critical to this success. We have a draft sequestration bill that we're working on right now. For purposes of its initial announcement as the Climate Restoration and Food Security Act, to get these kinds of things implemented that would include a technical assistance program so it can be scaled up at speed, and also include some kind of climate restoration core. The third leg of this policy suite is investing in community resilience, funding the implementation of resilience plans, which we are required to do in California's county and cities, but do not have the funds to do it. Establish resilience hubs, particularly prioritizing lower income communities, and implementing clean energy community microgrids with storage, including using electric vehicles for our storage, starting with critical facilities in lower income communities this year. We have 2 bills that we're working on with that, and one is already been introduced, SB 99, which we hope you will support. And I will make these slides, these will all be available online. I know I'm going through these quickly, but I want to be sure we get to Q&A. And the 4th pillar is funding climate action. We need to institute equitable funding strategies to produce an additional 12 to 20 billion a year, specifically for climate action. We can make regulatory changes that open up markets, as had been done with solar, so that solar is the cheapest form of electricity production today. And we want to engage the private sector and use the federal green stimulus funds, which now, what a difference a week makes should be on its way before too long. And all kinds of other ideas. There's a major ballot measure being proposed for 2022 that would bring $30 billion to climate solutions. That is not enough, but a great start. And we're going to start having to think about some kinds of progressive carbon taxes and fees and fee baits. And we're going to need all of this to do what needs to be done in the decade ahead. The suite of solutions exists today for California to enact now. As Terry Tamminen said in endorsing Climate Safe California, I strongly endorse it to achieve net negative emissions by 2030. 2050 is too late. The campaign's focus on science, urgency, and policy is exactly what's needed, and California must lead the way. We invite you today to endorse Climate Safe California. You can go to climatesafeca.org, and in your organizations or with however you want to write a personal letter or emails to the governor, to your state elected officials. We have to accelerate climate action. There's no choice. The science reality is telling us this is what we need to do. And this is a public pledge of support by endorsing Climate Safe California to accelerate aggressive climate policy and inspire states and countries to greater action for a climate safe Earth. And when we do that, this will be the headline in 2030. California is the first state to reach net negative emissions, kickstarting the nation and the world into equitable climate action. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ellie. That was a great summary of, again, a lifetime of work in 10 minutes. So I want to thank you for that. I also want to thank all of you who've already endorsed Climate Safe California. Just in the last 40 minutes, over 20 of you have joined our 800 plus endorsers. And we encourage those of you who have not done so yet to consider doing so as we move into our Q&A. So I'm glad we have some time here. Got some time to cover some of the questions. So let me start with this one from Zeno Swiding here in Sonoma County about the thresholds. And Ben, maybe you want to address this, and Ellie, if you want to add anything, or Jason, please do. Thresholds, 1.5, 2 degrees. We hear these thresholds. Are these simply physical tipping points, or are they also defined by economic models like cost benefit and other informed estimates? Is it just a scientific tipping point, or is it also an economic or social tipping point? Ben, I'll start with you, and anyone else on the panel want to answer that, please do.
Thanks. Let me just bring up this slide here. So we know from studying paleoclimate that the climate system has these tipping points in it. And there are a variety of different tipping points that are associated with things like big ice sheets, the conveyor belt circulation in the North Atlantic. This article that recently appeared in Nature tried to identify some of these tipping points and make the valuable point that these individual things are not discrete. They're actually linkages between different types of tipping points. The thing is, we don't know how close we are to exceeding some of these tipping points. Again, the message from paleoclimate is we know they exist. We don't know whether we're really close, whether we're not really close. 1.5 degrees and 2.0 degrees Celsius warming relative to pre-industrial are really kind of notional targets for political purposes, rather than based on firm scientific understanding of how close we are to the kind of tipping points you see in this slide. Wally Broecker, a very famous climate scientist, said it best: tipping points are real, and climate is like an angry beast, and we're poking it with a sharp stick. We don't know when the beast is going to really come and bite us, but prudence seems to be the watchword here. We really don't want to lose coral reefs, lose tropical rainforests, and change the Atlantic conveyor belt circulation, have massive release of methane from thawing permafrost. So let's try and understand these tipping points, and let's try and avoid them by being prudent about reducing emissions of greenhouse gases as quickly as we can.
Thank you so much, Dr. Santer. Ellie or Jason, did you want to add anything to that? No? Okay, we're good. Here's another really good question. This one comes from Michelle Cobb. And this is a question I think a lot of people ask or think but don't ask. If we went to net negative carbon today, how long would it take for warming to turn the curve? If emissions, so in other words, would it take years? Would it take decades? If we could just turn off the spigot, how long would it take for the climate to restabilize? Comments on that? Ellie?
Well, I'll throw something out, but Dr. Santer is the expert here. There is a new study that came out, I think in November, saying that actually it could stabilize much more quickly than many think in just a decade or two. I've talked to some scientists here in California that disagree strongly with that analysis. And all I can say is that we know that if you just look at the ocean and how much of the heat energy that we've kept in through global warming by building this blanket around the earth with greenhouse gases, a lot of that heat is being absorbed by the ocean. The ocean takes over 1,000 years to circulate. I just can't believe that it'll all be resolved in a decade or two, because there's so much latent heat hidden away that will have impacts on us for many generations to come. That being said, it will still be a huge step forward to stabilizing the climate and getting us to a better place than we would be if we don't do it. So that's my non-scientific view. Jason or Ben?
Yeah, maybe I can add a sentence or two. So in climate modeling world, one of the things we do are these so-called commitment calculations, where you wave some Harry Potter-like magic wand and you say, what if we could magically freeze atmospheric concentrations of carbon dioxide at current levels or at 2000 levels? how much warming is in the pipeline, how much would temperature continue to increase, how much would sea level continue to rise. Again, these are called commitment calculations, and they look at the in the pipeline climate change. And for the reasons Ellie articulated, we can still see significant changes in temperature and in sea level, even if you did have that Harry Potter-like magic wand and could freeze concentrations of atmospheric CO2 at current levels. The study Ellie referred to looks at the issue if we could reduce emissions of greenhouse gases to zero, would that be a good thing? Yes. And would climate respond relatively quickly? The message from this study is yes, within a couple of decades, if you could reduce emissions of carbon to zero, then you could, potentially have a substantial impact on climate. So we're talking about somewhat different things here: freezing atmospheric concentrations of CO2 versus reducing emissions of carbon to zero.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that. I think we have time for one more question. In the meantime, I would invite the panelists to review the Q&A. There may be some questions you can type an answer to. Again, I want to thank all of you for all of your amazing questions. I'm happy to report we set a goal for 30 endorsements for Climate Safe California. We're already at about 36, so keep those coming. We're all part of a coalition here, and we're going to have Nina come on the screen in a moment to share some ideas about actions that you can take in addition to simply endorsing Climate Safe California. But the last question I just want to pitch at the group is from Marty Roach, and it's about wildfires, because this is something that's been so much on our minds here in California and Colorado. Do wildfires affect overall emissions? Do we have a measure of this? I think it's another thing that sort of bounces around in people's minds. We know that wildfires are driven or exacerbated by extreme drought and the like, but how much are they part of this feedback loop? And is there a way, has anybody been studying that? Jason, Ben, you have any comments on that as our final question?
Yeah, let me jump in quickly.
Please.
Marty is right. So massive wildfires like the wildfires in Australia at the beginning of 2020 release carbon to the atmosphere, and not a trivial amount of carbon. Australian scientists have tried to quantify how much CO2 was released to the atmosphere, and that release of CO2 to the atmosphere from these massive wildfires in Australia and in California in the Western US will likely compensate for some of the COVID-related decrease in CO2 from emissions. So in a very real sense, as I think some folks have said, we're exacerbating the conditions for wildfires, and those wildfires are increasing the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere. So it's sort of an amplifying feedback effect, and that's bad news for all of us.
I'll just add, this is Jason from Union Concerned Scientists, just that the state is beginning to try to get a handle on California wildfire emissions and sort of evaluating them and getting better estimates. So that's work being done at the California Resources Board. I'm sure there's some resources to find and share with that questioner, the whole panel.
Wonderful.
And I'd like to just add one thing,
Please,
just
Ellie.
to remind everybody that in the Western United States, we have fire-prone ecosystems. That's part of the history of these ecosystems. And so for tens of thousands of years and maybe longer, we have had massive fires. Now, what's different today is that we have fewer forests left, and we have less habitat left that we're destroying with these fires. And so there's an interesting balance here about what would be the natural cycling of carbon versus what is human caused. And I just want to put that out there. We're not going to be able to address that fully right now, but there's no question that it's a big challenge, but we also have to separate out what is human driven versus what has been a natural part ecologically of these fire-based ecosystems in the West.
Those are all great answers. And I think this points to the fact that there's so much more we could be talking about, and which is why this is a webinar series. And we're going to have 6 more opportunities to delve more deeply into some of these specific questions. So we hope you'll all sign up for the other webinars. I also want to emphasize that our organization is about action and policy and solutions and working towards resolving these problems. So this is intended to set a baseline for us. But what we want you all to do is to engage, as you already are. And we thank you for everything, all of you, hundreds of people out there who are listening to us today, all that you're already doing. But for most of the bulk of the rest of the time, which is not much, but I do want to have my colleague, Nina, share with you some action items, because we want you to take action. We don't want you to sit here and listen. We want you to get involved and we get engaged, and we have some ideas for that. So for a few minutes, I'd like to turn over to Nina. Go ahead, Nina. What do you got for folks today?
Hi, everyone. Thank you. Again, my name is Janina Turner. I am the Energy Program Coordinator here at the Climate Center. And so attending this webinar today and learning about the science is a very important step in the fight for a climate safe future, but applying this new knowledge and taking action is how we get the real change made. So if you haven't done so already, I'm going to drop again, one more time, our link to endorse Climate Safe California. Super quick and easy, take the time to fill that out. But another important action that I'm asking you to take right now is contacting your legislators and our governor, Gavin Newsom, to accelerate climate action. So as we've learned today, the latest science demands more aggressive actions be taken sooner for the health of our planet and the health of our communities. So we need our elected officials to do what is necessary in the legislature to ensure net negative emissions and the start of drawdown by 2030. So I'm going to drop one more link in the chat. This is going to send you to a form that has a pre-filled email. All you have to do is just fill in your information, and it will send out that email to the governor, your senator, and your assembly member. So I know we're a little short on time, but please take the time to open that up, fill out that information, and hit send. And that is you taking action. And I want to thank you in advance for doing that. And I'm going to pass it off to Duran to close us out.
Thank you, Nina, and thank you everyone who attended today. Yes, and I see Sven just said thank you for making it easy. We want to make it easy. Remember that we're only going to solve these problems by working together. And that's individuals, that's organizations, that's the science, that's the politicians, that's the leaders, that's the people, that's all of us working together. And that's what the Climate Center is all about, building coalitions to resolve these critical issues. And thank you. I see more endorsements coming in for Climate Safe California. You will all be receiving follow-up emails. First of all, I want to make sure a couple people asked this question. Will the slide decks be available? Will the recording be available? The answer is yes and yes. We'll follow up with all of you and post those on our website so you can share them widely. Please do that because what we heard today from Jason, from Ellie, and from Dr. Santer is really, really important information. We want to thank our presenters. I want to thank you, Jason, and the Union of Concerned Scientists. I want to thank you, Dr. Ben Santer, not only to both of you for what you presented here today, but more importantly, for the work that you and your organizations and your colleagues have been doing tirelessly, often behind the scenes, in order to help us protect and preserve our planet. And to you, Ellie, for your leadership here at the Climate Center, we thank you. And every one of the hundreds of people who joined us here today, we want you to know how much we appreciate, and again, not only for the time you took to be here, but for everything all of you are doing every day to fight for a better world. So we want to thank you. We hope you'll join us for our next webinar coming up on February 23rd. I apologize for all the great questions we were not able to answer, but I really, really want to tell you how much we appreciate you being here. So once again, on behalf of the Climate Center, thank you all for coming. We'll see you on February 23rd. In the meantime, let's go out there and keep fighting the good fight. Thank you all so much. Take care.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
All right.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, Doc.